Well, I've got a very special guest tonight. Joining me now, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, founder and president of Rainbow Push Coalition. And I have to tell you, one of my heroes as a child, especially when he said, "I am somebody, I always felt it." But I also think that today, the old civil rights model that the Reverend helped to create, which sort of went like, hey, give me a shot, even though I may not have the skills, probably should be replaced with give me a shot, I do have the skills. And if that is the case, then a lot of the onus is going to have to be placed on blacks, Hispanics, and other underrepresented groups in certain industries if they want to earn success. And Reverend, I know you've been pushing hard for equality, if you will, in Silicon Valley. But if a black person doesn't have coding skills or computer skills, how can Google really give them a job?
Well, they really can't. But the fact is there's no evidence that blacks and Latinos cannot learn coding skills and app skills and financial literacy. That's a matter of priorities. Do we bring in H-1B workers from India? Or do we train youth here in America? Our absence is not natural, but it's normal. For example, in addition to the coding skills you mentioned, the top 25 Silicon Valley companies have 189 board members, 36 white women, 3 blacks and 1 Latino. C-suites, 370 is 3 blacks and 3 Latinos. Employment's down around 2%. That does not represent what we index, nor does it represent our capacity.
No, I agree with 1,000%. It doesn't represent our capacity. I guess the question is the solution. For me, it would have to be the education system, because when you talk about these H-1B visas, we're talking about foreigners and taking jobs or getting jobs that perhaps all Americans of all races, by the way, could have. But when you graduate 163,000 kids from India and China, they're going to get those jobs. So wouldn't you think that the onus would be on the families, on the communities, and particularly on the school systems, which, by the way, I think that's where the pressure should be?
Well, what we found out was that they were looking for black engineers in all the wrong places. The HBCU schools in the South and Southeast produce about 40% of all black engineers. They were not really recruiting at North Carolina A&T and Howard and Morgan and Morehouse and Hampton and Texas Southern and Tennessee State. And now they've begun that process. They're finding engineers. There is no talent deficit. There has been an opportunity deficit. And so that's one dimension, that whether we don't know, we're teachable. On the other hand, there was a major lawsuit was completed last week where 3 major auto companies were overpricing African Americans and Latinos and targeting us. They had to pay a fine for that. But that was a major ripoff. They had to pay for that. The big housing collapse. 3 million of the 9 million were African American Latinos. They found in the court that the banks were targeting, clustering, and steering loans the blacks and violating them. They had to pay a fine for that.
Right.
So when you're targeted by auto companies and targeted by banks, that is absolutely just wrong.
But no one's going to necessarily argue against that. But again, I think ultimately the answer, though, is getting a community that really does put more of an emphasis or the onus on, hey, engineering, going in that direction, and not this way that the funnel isn't so small and the opportunities to hold people back becomes a lot greater. When you've got 1 million who are prepared instead of a handful, it's a lot harder to hold anyone back. Don't you agree?
I do agree. But when you invest in those schools, you get the result from your investment. On the other hand, while STEM and engineering is very important, the non-STEM part of Silicon Valley is even bigger market. Lawyers, ad agencies, marketing, services, and the like. We're around 2% there. By Tim Cook's on the mission from Apple, he said, we're low in diversity in Silicon Valley. He said, and it's our fault. They are admitting, not only is it their fault, but by missing the black and brown market, they're missing market, money, talent, location, and growth. So they don't stand to gain because we have been losing, and we plan to change that paradigm.
All right. Well, again, I understand if they feel like they shouldn't have recruited in different areas, but I'm telling you, for me, ultimately, I think the onus is on us, black people and Hispanic people, to have more graduates who can do these jobs and make those demands, because you know what? It's harder to hold them back. And by the way, it brings me up to what's really another big thing that's been going on. And President Obama, you guys, I feel like you're fighting a lot of wars of yesteryear, like the Voting Rights Act, which just turned 50 years old. And as a consequence, it feels like it's making race relations in this country a whole lot worse. Things have gotten worse on both sides. I mean, there's a Gallup poll. You're looking at it right now. We have it on the screen. Not sure if you can see it, but 47% say relationships between blacks and whites are just simply not good. A couple of years ago, that was 70%.
Actually, what has happened on the voting situation is that so long as it was protected, but oversight from 1965 to 2013, that was substantial progress. And then the Supreme Court ruling in 2013 removed the oversight. And what the legislature of the South did was to gerrymander whites out of the Congress and stack and pack blacks in the back door of the legislatures. And that has not been good for America. And the Voting Rights Act was not just about blacks only. By the way, there's a big debate last night. No one mentioned the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. A big deal for all of America because blacks couldn't vote, white women couldn't serve on juries, 18-year-olds couldn't vote, those serving in Vietnam. You couldn't vote on college campus. You couldn't vote bilingually. So in many ways, America was transformed in 1965, and that was not acknowledged last night. And
right.
that progress is now facing a severe undercurrent.
But here's the thing, though, that again, though, and a lot of people now who are alive right now say that was 50 years ago. A lot of the atrocities, the real serious atrocities, were even older than that. You bring up the rights being sort of watered down, if you will, in 2013, and yet in 2014, blacks voted as a larger percentage than any other race, including white people. So how can we have two things? How can you be disenfranchised and victimized when you've actually were able to vote in larger numbers than anybody else? And that's what bothers a lot of people. That's why race relations are starting to crumble, because there's a lot of finger pointing when it feels like there shouldn't be.
Well, the vote was up in some districts, but but it left the vote. You know, we got the right to vote in 1965 after being denied for 95 years because of the use of schemes, gerrymandering, annexation, at-large, roll purging, and each time the vote was protected, we were able to make progress. But when the vote is unprotected, then you get manipulated by rule changes. You know, we do amazingly well on the athletic field. It's hard to be a first-class football player, basketball. It's hard to be the best in the world at those competitive sports. But whenever the playing field is even, rules public, goals clear, referees fair, and scores transparent, we do quite well. We're facing beyond the athletic field a lot of uneven fields.